Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Piss. Ukraine War news update, first part thereof for the 14th of August 2024, ignoring that I threw out an update late last night my time, which probably was still the 14th. Nonetheless, let's start with where we usually do the Ukrainian general staff figures for the Russian losses for the day before, or the usual caveat supply. You can find them in the description to the video below. 1,240 personnel loss is a bit of an uptick. It's at the higher end of the range that I see us having recently, from 1,000 to sort of 1,300 odd. That's pretty much where most of the figures are landing. So 1,240 is a good day for the Ukrainians there. Of course, remember, these are human beings. These are people often sent against their will to the front line. Not always. And even if they are doing it because they want to, because they believe the Ukrainians are all Nazis, then they are victims themselves of the whole gamut of Russian propaganda disinformation. That's another philosophical debate that we've had previously. Anyway, 21 tanks is a really big uptick from the previous numbers of about 3, 4, 5 tanks on a daily basis. To go up to 21 means there's been some serious tank losses. There have been some serious tank losses for Russia. 17 armored personnel vehicles, though, is on the daily average for that. So interesting that tanks have gone way up. APVs have stayed about, I think it might have been 17 yesterday, something like that. 57 artillery systems has gone back up a tad. We're approaching sort of 3, well, that probably is, oh yeah, it's over 3 times the daily average. 5 more multiple launch rocket systems, a very high number in that category. 1 anti-aircraft warfare system, it's good. Well, it depends what it is. 61 vehicles and fuel tanks, fairly high, and 7 pieces of special equipment. It's always tough to even know what they are. It's a kind of a wide remit for that category, but I think this is a good day of results for the Ukrainians. Again, questions of how much are we seeing in Kursk? How much is ending up on these lists? Are they including Kursk? Some people thinking they aren't. I would think they have to be, surely. Anyway, when we go to Andrew Perpetua's loss list, yesterday there were more losses for the Ukrainians than the Russians, and that's something I would expect just in general, because Kursk is going to be expensive for the Ukrainians. And yet today we have maybe a 2-to-1 Russian losses to Ukrainian losses. So that's good news for the Ukrainians. If you look at the light green down to the bottom of the orange, those are the combat losses. And for the Ukrainians, there are far fewer there. There's about 2-to-1 combat losses, Russian to Ukrainian, maybe a little bit more. No, probably about 2-to-1, but that's good for the Ukrainians. I have always said it should be about 3-to-1 plus as an intuitive kind of benchmark to say that, look, if the Ukraine is going to prevail in this war, they need to be attriting the Russian equipment at a 3-to-1 ratio, because the Russians have that much in storage that they can demothball. So 2-to-1 is good, but it's not as good as it has been. However, then when you understand the context of the Ukrainians being on the attack and still having a 2-to-1 combat asset loss ratio of Russian to Ukrainian losses, and that is doubly good, right? So, there are many variables that we need to take into account in order to assess the success of either side on a daily basis. Okay. It's also worth noting that both sides have quite a bit of surveillance and comms equipment lost, and that can sometimes, it depends whether you find that an important category to include in these lists. Okay, so the Ukrainians have lost a Tunguska M air defense system here, according to Andrew Perpetua. That's going to hurt a little bit, although it's fairly old. It's not the newest piece of equipment, I don't think. And hit by Lancet. Lancet still, if you look down here, Lancet, so on and so forth. So they are still being quite a problem for the Ukrainians. Quite a bit of surveillance and comms equipment, a couple of radars, 2 ANTPQ-50s taken out by FPV drones. That's going to hurt. They're losing quite a few bits of radar at the moment, the Ukrainians. That's something they would want to stop happening. Recovery vehicle also taken or abandoned there. A Brem recovery vehicle. Then when we get onto the combat losses, we've got an AHS Crab destroyed. That's the self-propelled Polish South Korean self-propelled gun. Only one taken out, only one piece of artillery registered today. Then we have a destroyed PT-91 Twardie. That's the Polish version of the T-72, I believe. That one's taken out, destroyed. We have another damaged tank then. A few BMPs, BTRs in the infantry fighting vehicle segment, and then quite a lot of APCs taken out. So 2 captured Western pieces of kit, a Striker and a Senator. That's going to hurt a little bit there. Then we have Senators being used quite a lot. They have quite a lot of Senators. The Canadians have given or sold or whatever it is, well over 1,000 of those now. So they do have quite a few of these in stock as they do Humvees. Of course, Senators aren't really designed to be MRAPs, right? They're not mine-resistant ambush protection vehicles. They are just glorified security vehicles that have been adapted to military configuration. So they were originally designed to take money from banks or whatever. There were some complaints by Ukrainians that, hey, these don't survive as well on the front line. Yeah, you shouldn't really be using them on the front line. I don't think that's, although they might have developed slightly more robust versions of them, but they are clearly using them a lot near the front lines and up in Kursk. A number of these are being lost, destroyed. There are 2 destroyed by Lancets. I saw one of them destroyed by Lancet actually, and yeah, it did go up in smoke, caught fire, and that was the end of that one. Lancets here, Striker, BTR, Senator. So I think it I don't know what that tells us, that they're using so many Senators. Should they be using those? I guess so. If they're just using them to get troops from A to B, are there better vehicles they could use? Probably. Like the Striker is a better vehicle. It's more properly designed, I think, from bottom up for combat use. Nevertheless, yeah, they are using and losing quite a few Western provided pieces of equipment, combat asset losses. Anyway, a few MRAPs there damaged or destroyed, and then down to civilian vehicles, a number of those. Then when we go to the Russian losses of electronic warfare piece, Psylocke, then we have a lot of surveillance and comms equipment, taking out quite a few slots here in the Russian losses. I have a Brem 1 recovery vehicle taken out. What do we have here? Uragan, that is a multiple launch rocket system, destroyed. We have a Tulip, basically a 240 mil self-propelled mortar, taken out, destroyed. And then going on to tanks, we have a few different ones, including T90A. That's part of the T90 family. Not the best version. T90M is the best version, but still a decent tank there destroyed. In fact, look at the proportion of tanks destroyed to damage. That's good news for the Ukrainians there. So they've got, 6 out of 8. So that's 3/4 destroyed. A few track garden sheds, 3 in there, and that's probably from that attack that I showed you last night in Lipsy, and more on that in a moment, because that attack in Lipsy, I think, or some attacks in Lipsy, have caused the Russians to lose quite a lot of equipment. That's up in the Kharkiv direction. Then when you look at infantry fighting vehicle, wow, what a category there that has seen huge losses for the Russians. Almost all of them destroyed. I mean, look at that. The brown and black abandoned and destroyed. A couple of track garden sheds, but mainly BMP 1s, 2s, and 3s. That is a bad day at the office for the Russians in infantry fighting vehicle losses. And with APCs, they have 4 out of 6, so 2/3 there lost. 2/3 destroyed. MTLBs mainly. A couple damaged, and then trucks and civilian vehicles, most of these destroyed as well. So this is a challenging day when you look at if you look at the brown and black proportions for the Russians. That is really challenging. To be fair, the same for the Ukrainians. There's just far fewer vehicles there than the Russians. So yeah, a bad day at the office for the Russians, given that the Ukrainians are on the attack and should be losing quite a bit of kit. Okay, well, as I keep telling you, there are so many videos coming out of Russian POWs. Anton Gerashchenko says yet another video of replenishing of the Ukrainian exchange fund. This time, Ukrainian defenders captured 30 Russian soldiers in 2 trips, or they captured them and had to ship them in 2 trips. They have so many. There are so many videos coming out that I'll just show you 1 or 2 a day, or reference 1 or 2 a day, just to indicate that they are continuing to take a lot of POWs. Shashank Joshi quotes from the New Lines magazine, quote, a Ukrainian source close to the military with first-hand knowledge of the operation told New Lines that the invading troops were shocked by how many prisoners of war they were able to catch on the Russian side. And this is partly because it is thought a number of them are conscripts that shouldn't really be fighting. And so these young, sort of 19-year-old conscripts drawn into the army for their year in the army or whatever, are not supposed to be on the front line. Then they end up being on the front line, and the Ukrainians are there with big tanks and well drilled, well trained, well experienced soldiers. And these kids go, "Yeah, no, that's fine. You're all right. I want to live." So they've probably, being younger, have seen this. I've not thought this. This is me spitballing. They've probably been more likely, being younger, to have VPNs, virtual private networks, so they can see Ukrainian evidence and sources, and realize that they're not going to be tortured, that they're not going to be killed as POWs, that actually things will be all right. And they are probably less vulnerable to that propaganda that's so rife on the Russian side. That when you see some of these mobilized or volunteer troops, that really, particularly volunteers, are already completely sunk in the Russian propaganda, want to go down and kill those Ukraine Nazis, and then feed on this narrative that they're going to be tortured, and therefore it's better to die on a battlefield than to be captured as POW. These conscripts are thinking, that's a load of rubbish. Yep, down tools, hands up. Thank you very much. I'll go into captivity. So these guys seem to be giving up much more easily, and that's completely understandable. So they're probably taking a lot of prisoners, not because they're doing such a good job of attacking, although you can argue that is happening as well, but that the types of troops they're coming up against just aren't up for this, and are far more likely to realize that if they are captured, they're not going to be tortured. Okay, Shashank Joshi then himself says, "I'm very skeptical myself, but interesting to note this quote from the article, quote, Crimea is now seen as a more viable target for recapture by the Ukrainian General Staff, which has for months degraded Russian naval and air defense assets in combined drone and missile strikes." Now, some Russian sources are worried about Crimea being taken. There's activity on Kimber and Spit, but I'm going to give you a bit of a reality check with that a bit later. I meant to do that last night, but I was unable to. There does seem to be shaping operations. Crimea is having its air defenses absolutely hammered, and in fact, the Russians are probably thinking, "What's the point of keeping air defense here? Only two out of the 5 airfields are not really operational in Crimea, and the Black Sea Fleet has up sticks and gone to Novorossiysk, and actually largely gone out there and gone south to the port in Abkhazia that they've kind of nicked off Georgia." So there might be an element of Russia saying, do we really need Crimea now? Because Crimea was always about, my opinion, was always about that deep sea warm water port. Well, if that is now functionally untenable for the Russians, then actually Crimea becomes less important. Yes, it's important for getting supplies possibly to the Zaporizhia and Kherson Oblast for their army, but other than that, in and of itself, it's considering it's a war zone. Tourism's not going to be particularly good there, and also you've had the fresh water turned off at Kakhovka, such that you've had the flooding of the dam. So the explosion of the Novokakhovka dam and the flooding of that area, meaning that there isn't going to be much fresh water coming down from Dnipro River to Crimea. So your agriculture there is going to be severely affected. So the Russians might be thinking, well, let's cut our losses in Crimea, and the Ukrainians might be thinking, well, now's a good time to try and strike Crimea. So we shall see. Anyway, here is a report from Lipsy, or a video from Lipsy, that shows a number of vehicles destroyed: 4 tanks destroyed, 4 tanks damaged, 2 BMPs destroyed, and 1 car damaged by the 92nd and 43rd assault brigades, repelling those attacks in Lipsy. So the Russians, it appears, are still trying to make gains in the Kharkiv direction, even though supposedly some of their troops from Kharkiv and other areas have been moved to Kursk to try and stem the Ukrainian advances in Kursk. Then we have another video here, the latest attempt by Russian forces to assault in the Kurakova direction. So this is down Novomykhailivka sort of area, further down south. Anyway, latest attempt by the Russian forces to assault in the Kursk direction has failed once again. The Russian army launched an attack with 2 armored vehicles carrying troops under the cover of a tank. During the battle, the tank and 1 armored vehicle were destroyed, while another was taken out by the 72nd Mechanized Brigade. 6 Russian soldiers were killed and 12 were wounded. So again, another attack. They are still plugging away at all in many of these areas, whilst also losing a lot of area in Kursk. Now, there are some caveats to apply, and we'll get to that in a second. First of all, there are reports that the Russians have lost another Su-34 in the Kursk region. Don't know, as Tim White says, and there's no way to verify this claim, but Ukraine says it has shot down another plane there, so that's really good news. But this also came out. So Military News UA says footage of the dropping of 2 French AASM-250 Hammer, those are those guided glide bombs, air bombs, by a MiG-29 fighter of the Air Force of the Armed Forces of Ukraine on the positions of Russians. Okay, but then it says the pilot of this plane is Alexander Migulia, who died during a combat mission on August the 12th. So that is 2 days ago. Eternal memory of the hero. It appears that a MiG, one could assume the inference that I'm making is that a MiG-29 has been shot down, a Ukrainian MiG-29. So bear in mind that it's not all going in the Ukrainians' direction. Of course it isn't. And indeed, the 810th Naval Infantry Brigade, so this is a brigade that has not got very good heritage in action down in Kherson, where they got quite a bloody nose down there. They've been brought up to Kursk, but they have actually managed to have an effect there. They've ambushed the Ukrainian Rochelle Senator and Cougar H MRAPs somewhere in Kursk. Parts of the crew was sad. Some of the crew were killed. He won't post the pictures. This is War Vehicle Tracker. The 810th seems to be having success in Kursk, unlike other Russian units stationed there. So interesting that these guys, battle hardened, but having been, having had a right, as I mentioned, bloody nose down in Kherson and not performing well down there. I guess they're going to be more battle hardened than units with conscripts up in Kursk, if that's what you're comparing them to, have had some success here, ambushing a Ukrainian group and doing some damage. He says it's not a Senator, it was a Kozak 7. So it seems that they not only lost 2 MRAPs, but also more vehicles in the ambush. These include 1 Humvee, 2 Kozak MRAPs, and 3 Rochelle Senator MRAPs, question mark, so not sure. Some of them are so destroyed that he's not sure, but there you go. So a number of vehicles taken out there. It's not all plain sailing for the Ukrainians. Of course, they are going to lose a number of pieces of equipment as they are attacking. So he adds, and another Rochelle Senator was abandoned by its crew. At least 2 crew members lost their lives there. Sadly, I cut them out of the picture. So yeah, there is a group that has not had much success up there for the Ukrainians, getting taken out by the 810th. Then there is this. So Iskander M missile strike on a parking lot of the Su-27, Ukrainian Su-27 at Mirgorod field. Airfield, in the Poltava region of Ukraine. Not for the first time this airfield has been targeted. In fact, it gets targeted quite regularly. UK, so this is Sarin, the Twitter handle, saying UK did not give Ukraine permission to use Storm Shadow missiles on the territory of Russia, and yet Russia is using Iskanders to hammer the air bases of the Ukrainians. I don't know what damage has been done here. White smoke can indicate decoy, or it could just be bad news for that airbase and things being lost. But yeah, I see nothing there in the strike shot. It's a mock-up just like the other 10 times. So this is potentially one of the places where the Ukrainians are relying on decoys quite a bit. It does get hit regularly. So you'd be pretty stupid, I think, if you Ukrainians go, we've been hit here 9 times previously. Yeah, let's just park our Su-27s out there in the aprons in the airfields. They won't get hit this time. Oh, they've been hit again. Either the Ukrainians are being very carefree and stupid, or they are using decoys. This video doesn't particularly give you any confirmation either way. And then finally, for the hits and losses section, just a bit of Russia on fire. Shopping mall is burning in southwest Moscow. The fire at the Rio Mall looked to spread over several floors. In the last few minutes, Russia's emergency services say they have extinguished the blaze, but yet another mall burning in Russia, something I've not reported on for some time, but these things happen with regular consistency. Okay, moving on to distant strikes, and quite a lot to report. It always annoys me when that goes to the wrong place. Anyway, it's been quite a night for the Ukrainians. They've had some success. Well, we don't know how much success they've had yet, but they've certainly attacked a number of places, very important targets in Russia. But let's go to what the Russians have done in Ukraine. So 17 out of 23 attack drones were intercepted by the Ukrainians, still 6 getting through. Russia also fired 2 Kh-5969 guided air missiles. Zhytomyr and Chernihiv regions were hit. Infrastructure was damaged, but no casualties reported. We don't often hear about the details of successful Russian strikes. So rest assured that they probably are having success on a nightly basis with those drones that do get through, although the Ukrainians have had recently a very good interception rate on those attack drones, but 6 out of 23 getting through is probably one of their lower interception rates that we've seen recently. That's 6 out of 24, which is called, so that's about 75% there. Interception rate, which is good compared to like at the beginning of the war, but we've been having days of 100%, 95%, so on and so forth. So damage might have been done to Ukraine. I just don't know what. Also worth remembering that, and I could have had this in the previous section because these are kind of FPV drone strikes, really, I think, probably, or Lancets maybe. But Andrew Perpetua does record these and gets really rightfully angry about what's been going on in this way for some time. The Russians just consistently doing things like this, which is, he says, Russia's performed multiple drone attacks on strikes on civilians today. Among the attacks, they attacked a water distribution point in Kherson. So these are people going to get water so they can continue living. Yeah, let's strike them because that's a military target. A humanitarian aid worker in Kupiansk. They also used a drone to hit an emergency vehicle that was responding to people in need after Russia shelled them. This is what Russia do. So be under no illusions, no illusion as to who the bad guys are in this, as Justin at Time says, absolute bastards. And that is kind of how I interpret that data. Now we're going to go on to the Ukrainian strikes, and my goodness, there could be some incredibly good news coming out for the Ukrainians, or not. I don't know, right? It's difficult to get really good information on these because you won't have spotter drones. They happen at night and they're often very, very deep into Russian territory. So these are one-way attack drones sent for 300, 400 kilometers into Russia, and they explode at air bases. And people who live near the air bases report on fires in the distance and explosions, and you hear it and you can see explosions. You have no idea what's destroyed, if anything, until, if you're lucky, you get some satellite imagery of decent enough quality coming out that shows you what has been destroyed. But quite often they clear stuff up, probably precisely so that you can't work out what's been hit by satellite imagery, as a way of managing their PR and managing the expectations of their own domestic audience. So it's really difficult to know what the outcome of these sorts of strikes are. But there was a massive strike last night on Russian regions, and is this one of the largest of the Ukrainian strikes to date? As Rebar, the pro-Russian source, says, last night the AFU, and he titles this massive AFU raid on Russian regions. The AFU launched one of the largest drone raids on 8 Russian regions, according to the Russian Defense Ministry. So this is a Russian MOD claim here. 117 drones and 4 missiles were intercepted. So they managed to, the implication here is, shoot down all the drones and all the missiles. They intercepted all of them. So that's good news for the Russians. They've done a really good job of stopping this massive wave of Ukrainian ordnance. War Monitor says Ukrainian forces are now utilizing mass drone attacks, one of which occurred yesterday, attacking Russian air bases, which were also likely launched from Russian territory. He says in total 37 drones were used, while 117 seems to be more likely the case. But anyway, the idea that some of them being launched from Russia is interesting. It could be Kursk. It could be, I don't know. I don't know the provenance of that claim at all. So take it with a pinch of salt. Now, Tim White says that attack is just part. Oh, so what attack? Goodness me. Let's have a look. So plenty has happened. More villages under Ukrainian control in Kursk and drone attacks by both sides. First, Russia. To Russia, though, where there have been explosions at an airbase. Actually, there are 4 air bases, I think, targeted. But he's talking about one in Nizhny Novgorod, used by planes which fire Kinzhal missiles. Up to 10 explosions were heard at the Savaleskaya base, airbase in Nizhny Novgorod. MiG-31Ks there carry Kinzhal Dagger hypersonic missiles. Many drones were seen flying unhindered. Some wrote that the village of Kulabaki was blocked, but authorities say there were no arrivals. Yeah, lots of reports that only small arms fire was being used against these drones. You had fighter bomber, the Russian pilot Telegram channel, who's quite when he makes claims about bad things happening for Russia, they are usually accurate. That kind of enemy attestation I've talked about previously. Well, fighter bomber is fairly reliable. And he said that these quiet bases in the back end of nowhere, sitting there, with their feet up type thing. I'm paraphrasing. They're going to get attention, and he talked about a couple of pantsirs at air bases, but not seeming to do anything. Anyway, Tim White then says that attack is just part of what's possibly Ukraine's biggest ever coordinated attack. Russia says it shot down 117 drones across various regions. This is from Voronezh, not reported exactly where, but it's another region where an airport of interest is to Ukraine. So some serious burning going on there. Attack drones were also seen in Kursk, Belgorod, Lipetsk, Nizhny Novgorod, Volgograd, and the video shows one more drone in the Oryol region. Russia also says it destroyed 4 missiles mid-flight. So, yes, Tim White later says Ukraine's overnight attack targeted 4 airfields in Russia in an operation to prevent aerial bombs being dropped. The bases are Severskaya in Nizhny Novgorod, Kursk, and 2 in Voronezh, Baltimore, and Borisovlebsk. Russian channels admit attacks on 3 and some losses. We'll see. This is the fighter bomber one, actually. At night, the Ukrainians attacked 3 of our airfields, effectively on some of them, unfortunately, but naturally. So they attacked it effectively. The problem is the same. The further the airfield is from the LBS, so from the front line, the more peaceful life there is. Well, and covering a military airfield with 1 or 2 panzers, you can only hope for a chance. Actually, many people do hope for it. So he's saying not enough air defences around these air bases. And that's what I've already told you. So here we have some satellite imagery already out on Borisovlebsk. Now, if I'm right, was Borisovlebsk targeted the night before? Is this from attack on the night of August the 14th? That would assume last night. So that's last night's one. So there are claims to there being destruction at Borisovlebsk. I've got some more on that later, so don't worry, I'll come back to that. In fact, this is it. Here's the later already. So Eurominded Press says strike on the Severskaya airfield. It appears that a drone damaged a Russian warplane. So you can see a drone exploding there, and apparently it was right near to, I think it might have been a MiG-31K or something. Big explosion there. At a Borisovlebsk military base, a drone assault destroyed storage and maintenance facilities and possibly an airframe there. We have damage done to certain areas as seen on satellite imagery that's already out. Difficult to know exactly what's achieved. Fire at what's believed to be a fuel storage location was detected by NASA firms. Satellites at Severskaya. Defense Express suggests that the attack on Severskaya airbase may have destroyed crucial T6 fuel reserves for MiG-31Ks, which are essential for the supersonic flights required to launch Kinzhal missiles. And then, that one's I've already shown you spectacular drone footage against the Russian Severskaya airbase in Nizhny Novgorod. You can see the drone dive bombing. And 2 air bases in Voronezh were attacked in addition to Severskaya. Russian Telegram channel close to the Russian airport says some strikes were resultative. Satellite pictures will show how resultative they are, and that's referring to that fighter bomber claim. Let's go through just last in this section, Special Kherson Cats um, analysis of what has taken place. So those are the 3 air bases you can see there. 2 of them very close in the Voronezh region to Ukraine, and 1 much further to the north. Tonight there was a large attack by Ukrainian drones on 3 Russian military airfields, so saying 3 rather than 4, some saying 4. Borisovglebsk and Baltimore in the Voronezh region, as well as Sevastopol in Nizhny Novgorod. Baltimore and Borisovglebsk are located 108 in 340 kilometers from the front line. Sevastopol, which is Russian MiG-31 base, is located 650 kilometers from the front line. A compilation of sounds and drones flying overhead, explosions and Russian air defense activity during the attack on Baltimore military airfield can be heard in that particular video. So that's Baltimore Air Base, and here is Borisovglebsk, and this is Sevastopol. Anyway, a compilation of recordings made by locals concerning drones during the attack on Borisovglebsk military airfield in Voronezh region, and footage of tonight's drone attack on Sevastopol military airfield. It's located further away compared to the other airfields which were attacked tonight, so drones arrived at the location already in the morning. Russian source associated with the Russian military aviation regarding tonight's drone attack on Russian military airfields. That's the fighter bomber source again, saying there's been some success for the Ukrainians. Moment of the arrival of the Ukrainian kamikaze drone on a Russian Sevastopol, which we've already seen. And then first satellite image of the damage to infrastructure at the Russian Borisovglebsk, which we've already seen. So that seems to be what's out at the moment, but it'll be one of those cases of information trickling through throughout the day and maybe throughout the week, really, as satellite imagery comes through. It doesn't come through straight away. Sometimes you have to wait 2 or 3 days before a pass of significant enough resolution for the area, and by that time the Russians may well have cleared up most of what could have been destroyed, so it's very difficult to know the real results. Anyway, going on to other bits and pieces, and we're going to start with Kursk as ever. I did a Kursk update last night, so go and check that one out. Ukraine's top soldier, or the commander-in-chief, Syrsky, updating Zelensky, says they have advanced another 1 to 2 kilometers in the Kursk area and, quote, completed the elimination of enemy forces in Sudzha. He also estimates another 100 of Russia's soldiers are now POWs, so that could be 100, that could be a daily assessment, which would be quite incredible. If they're taking 100 POWs a day, that would be insanely good, because that allows you to just really top up that exchange fund and get your own troops back. So some of those Azov fighters still imprisoned in Russia, needing to be released. Now, this is Phillips O'Brien using Andrew Perpetua's map and superimposing over it, or Andrew Perpetua's done that, sorry. But Phillips O'Brien talking about this, the amount of area that the Ukrainians have taken in the Kursk region compared to the entire Avdiivka region, which has been on the go since October last year. And we're getting towards October this year. So, this is 10 months of 9 or 10 months of Russian advances in that area at incredible cost to the Russians. Remember, in that area, they have lost 5-1 combat losses to Ukrainian combat losses. So that's been supremely expensive for the Russians, and they've taken less land than the Ukrainians have taken in a week. So Andrew said this is the most recent furthest extent of the Avdiivka advance compared to the advance in Kursk, and of course the advance in Kursk is very conservative. So Ukraine has taken more ground in a week in Kursk than Russia has taken in Avdiivka theatre all year, says Phillips O'Brien. Now, Russia has pulled reserves from key battleground areas in Ukraine, including Zaporizhzhia and Kharkiv, and from Crimea, in an effort to hold back Ukrainian advances into Russian territory. And this could feed into theories that Ukraine could be shaping to take Crimea. Anyway, a Ukrainian military commander told CNN on Wednesday. So there are these different news sources, news entities that are reporting on the idea or the fact or the claim that the Russians are taking troops from around the frontline areas and even from Kaliningrad and drafting them in to Kursk. There are also claims that it hasn't affected the Toretsk region, as I reported yesterday, and that is going to be, or earlier this morning, and that is going to be understandable considering that's the area that the Russians are having the most success. So it's probably going to be the last area that the Russians would take their own troops from. They're far more likely to take them from quieter areas on the front line, Kherson, particularly Crimea, right? Take them from there, Kaliningrad, draft them to Kursk, and keep the areas that are proving to be the most successful for the Russians, keeping those topped up. But yeah, pretty good operation indeed, says General Ben Hodges, or retired general. In addition to good points below by Mark Hartling, it is also denying the use of a large area in Kursk from which Russians were launching drones against Ukrainian civilians. This is an important point, that actually they've denied the Russians the ability to use maybe drones with only a certain amount of range, maybe Lancet drones, and it was an area of launching maybe reconnaissance drones and so on and so forth. Well, by taking that area into Kursk, they're denying the Ukrainians that. Mark Hartling, another retired former Bradley commander, and then eventually went up the ranks. So he says Ukrainian forces are inside of Russia contribute to the hitting of 4 Russian airfields used for bombing civilian targets, and those were themselves war crimes. The Russians were committing war crimes from those air bases into Ukraine. And then he says Ukraine captures hundreds of Russian soldiers who mostly surrendered. Pretty good operation. So he's quite upbeat about what's going on in Kursk. I think it's been a tremendously successful operation so far, but the whole question is, what do you do once the Russians throw loads of reserves and forces, or not even reserves, forces from elsewhere against the Ukrainians? Do they take the battle? Would they rather just fight? If they're going to have a big attritional battle, would they rather fight that in Kursk than down in the Ukrainian area? And it could be that if you're going to destroy any kind of area during battle, you might as well destroy that in Russia, where there are fewer fortifications, but you're going to blow up towns and villages. Let's blow those up in Russia, and then Russia will have to fix those places, spend money fixing them up, rather than always having your battles down in Ukraine, which is essentially just damaging your own country. Right. President Biden has said he's been spending 4 to 5 hours a day discussing the Ukrainian offensive, and that shows that Biden is concentrating on Ukraine like he said he was going to in this kind of lame duck period before the elections. You've also had this, I mean, this is great. You can only barely hear this, but you have the calls of Slava Ukraini from those in Kursk, those Russians from buildings in Kursk, just shouting them out. You can hear it.
Улица План. Слава Украине кричат, прикинь.
So you can just hear it in the background.
Вот и первый местный житель.
So yeah, I mean, Kursk is an interesting place. It was, I think, kind of Ukrainian up to 1912, and here's an example of Ukrainians moving through a town and hearing the shouts in the distance of Slava Ukraini from Russians. So that tells you quite a lot. This nugget has come out from, I mean, take it with a pinch of salt, but claims that the Russian army looting their compatriots' houses in Sudzha wasn't the craziest news. So there has been widespread news of Russians with the destruction or the complete evaporation of law and order in Kursk. They've just started looting houses in a way that Ukrainians didn't when the Ukrainians were invaded. They seem to have a much better self-control. The Russians, on the other hand, they're so used to living under oppression that as soon as they don't have that oppressive regime in place with the law and order, they just go a bit crazy, and they started looting widely. But this person then says now they've started killing their own. 2 girls recently evacuated from Sudzha by the Russian military were found murdered. The girls' parents suspect the soldiers who accompanied them during the evacuation. So that's terribly sad for those girls from Kursk. Now, Ukraine plans, this is kind of a switcheroo, isn't it? Ukraine plans to open humanitarian corridors for the evacuation of civilians from the Kursk region, according to the Minister of Reintegration. Vereshchuk said that the corridors will open both towards Russia and Ukraine. Humanitarian operations are also planned to support Russian civilians in the border areas. Wow. And Belarus is to transfer military equipment to Russia amid Ukraine's operation in Kursk Oblast. Now, I reported this last night, but I want to add something to it. The recent delivery of Belarusian military equipment is related to an, quote, urgent request from the Russian side due to losses and lack of equipment in Kursk Oblast and other areas, Belnovosti said, citing an undisclosed source in the Russian's defense ministry. Now, to add to that, Tim White says this is also interesting. The original report of an independent Belarus news agency goes into a lot of detail. Lukashenko knows that only about a third of his army would fight if ordered. So equipment and propaganda are all he can give to keep Putin's support. Right. Let's rewind. I've given you a number of my opinions on Belarus over time. And if we go literally like 2 years back, early in the war, the foreign minister of Belarus was assassinated by the Russians, right? And Lukashenko was only in place because Putin put him in place. So he didn't win the election, was basically, crappy election, was put in place by Putin, but he knows that he is only holding on to power by grace of Putin. The people in Belarus generally don't like him and aren't that supportive of fighting in Ukraine if they were called to do so by Lukashenko, well, by proxy, Putin. And Lukashenko knows this, and he knows. So I've long said that he's been walking this really careful line between helping Putin just enough that keeps Putin happy, but not helping him so much that his own population get really pissed off because they don't want to help Putin. So he knows that only a third of his army would fight in Ukraine if he ordered his army to fight. So that's 2/3 not fighting, which means you've got a problem on your hands. So he can only help Putin up to a certain point. And Putin probably knows this as well. Lukashenko was maybe like erring too far from what Putin wanted, or at least his foreign minister was, and his foreign minister ended up dying. And that was a warning shot to Lukashenko to say, you're next if you don't toe the party line, the Kremlin party line. So Lukashenko now knows, right, I could be for the chopping block, quite literally, if I don't do what Putin wants, but I can't do everything he wants. So I've got to just only be able to give him just enough, and that's what's going on. So in this case, it's like, okay, you can have some of our equipment, but you ain't having any of our troops because that would cause a bit of a problem. Now, I talked about the Kimber and Spit being a place of here. Russian sources saying it's a source of worries for Russians, maybe a key area in the coming weeks, says PS01. There was an attack on Kimber and Spit on August the 6th, and it was thought that the Ukrainians did pretty well there. They did, in terms of they did take out 6 pieces of equipment, and the Russians took some losses. But that's from the Ukrainian point of view. That's from their information. The reality is possibly a little bit more complex. As this pro-Ukrainian source says, there is still plenty of frothing, hysterical cheerleading from both sides about the GUR raid on Kimber and Spit. It was not a raging success for either side. Both sides took heavy losses, something I verified even down to identifying some individuals. This still is from drone footage from the Russian side. They saw it coming. Accurate analysis can only be done with unemotional objectivity. Bias makes you blind and stupid. Altering reality to give yourself better feelings means you're lying to yourself. War is ugly, and rarely is an objective achieved without cost. But it's nice when it does. This operation was not one of those. So the Ukrainians and the Russians took some losses here. If you remember, was it a couple of months before that? There was another attack by the Ukrainian GUR special forces further southeast down the coast, I think, and it actually ended pretty badly for the Ukrainians. They were seen coming and they were taken out. Well, this seems to have been what's happened here as well. So yeah, be warned. Although you might think, yeah, things are going well in Kimber and Spit, and they are doing shaping operations, it might be more challenging than you think, or it could be just a case of keeping on attriting the Russians, taking quite a few losses yourself, but degrading the Russians. I would try and do that by air, by drones rather than special forces. I would do everything that I could by drones. I'd be trying to ramp up drone production to ridiculous levels, so that last night's 117 drone attacks on Russian soil would be 200 every night. You're sending that many drones in to just hit everything you can. Any of these positions, you just need really good satellite imagery and you really current, decent satellite imagery, and a shed load of drones and missiles, and just sit back and do everything from a distance and not expend your own troops. But obviously, that's not quite possible. So they do have to use troops in a number of places. Now, this is just an interesting bit of video that apropos to nothing in particular, but here we have a Russian medevac here. We've got a motorcyclist taking an injured Russian soldier back to some kind of staging point, I would have thought. And look at, he's literally gaffer taped him they've gaffer taped the injured guy to the driver just so he doesn't fall off. And there you go, off you go. It's quite incredible there. I don't know what that tells you. Needs must, I guess. Necessity is the mother of all invention. So yeah, if it does a job, it does a job. Right. According to Russia's central bank, the ruble took a big hit yesterday, falling by almost 4% against the euro, says Yanis Kluger. Since the start of the Kursk offensive on August the 6th, Russia's currency has lost 7.5% against the euro. This will cause more inflation, of course, with the labour market issues they have and a lack of men to do many jobs. You have wage inflation, and that causes a inflation wage spiral, and then it becomes all a bit of an economic issue. And they've put up interest rates to try and get a handle on that, but it doesn't seem to have worked. And now with the ruble crashing, it appears inflation is going to be even further hit. Right. Next to reports that yesterday security measures were strengthened in Moscow due to the threat of sabotage from infiltration groups. Kremlin media report that police officers in Moscow and the Moscow region have been warned about possible attempts to seize their weapons as they're sort of working around Moscow. So interesting. Don't know what that's signifying. Ukraine aims to boost its share of consumption of green energy to 27% by 2030. This might well be a strategic decision in light of war, rather than they're not trying to be necessarily green, although that might be part of it. But actually, this is a way of mitigating against the destruction of more centralized energy power plants, right? So if you've got, I don't know, central heating power plant or a thermal power plant that provides a large region from one place with all of its energy or central heating, and that gets blown up, then that becomes just an easier target. It's just one single place that you just hit the main control area of that over and over with a bunch of missiles, and jobs are good. Whereas if you've got like huge fields of wind turbines, okay, you're not going to produce as much electricity. Yeah, I'm not trying to make some kind of big environmental argument here, although I do love renewable energy. What you need to do is decentralize your energy infrastructure so it becomes harder to take out. If you split it into lots of bits, so you got loads of wind turbines where you can send a Kinjal, you got like 100 wind turbines there. Well, that's 100 Kinjal missiles. You're not going to expend them on wind turbines. Whereas 10 Kinjal missiles against a power plant is going to do some serious damage. So this is a good way of mitigating against missile strikes, I think, and you can take the load off by getting solar panels on top of houses. Try and roll that out big time with the help of the EU. It's yes, okay, environmental bonus too, but you are basically allowing people to be sufficient in terms of energy, and so they're not drawing so much on the grid, so the grid can be put towards like industry to build weapons, and also these smaller businesses can have their own power production, which means that they are going to be able to operate. The economy can still keep functioning a little bit if you get massive strikes to big energy infrastructure. So I think that is really good for the Ukrainians there. Now, Tim White says, breaking news, another American citizen has been arrested in Russia. I mean, what are these people still doing there, he says. The Kremlin says they were detained in Moscow on suspicion of using violence against government officials when allegedly refusing to show documents to a police officer. Probably trumped up charges. As mentioned before, this is going to be something that I think the Russians are going to do. If I was American, I would not be in Russia. If I was British, I would not be in Russia. If I was French, I would not be in Russia. If I was German, I'd not be in Russia. Just get out of Dodge. Anyway, that's enough from me. That's a long one for me today. A lot of news. Take care, guys. All the best, and I'll speak soon.